So economic recessions are a normal part of all of our business cycles. For the last 70 years, since the end of World War II, we've gone through 10 recessions, and those are marked by the columns here, the blue columns. On average, one every 7 years. The longest amount of time between any recession's end and beginning is 10 years, and that was March of 91 through March of 2001. It's been 8 years and 8 months since the last recession ended. So historically, we're due for one. In a year and 4 months, we're going to have matched the most amount of time in history between recessions. And yet nobody's talking about it, nobody's warning us about it. There aren't articles in the Wall Street Journal. And why is that? Well, in part because the economy is doing great right now, and the stock market's doing great right now. This is the S&P 500 over the last 30 years. Those blue columns are the recessions I mentioned. Despite 3 recessions in that period of time, the S&P 500 is up almost 1,000% in 30 years. It's up close to 300% in just the last 9 years. And you see here before the recession, oh, this doesn't work on this monitor. That's going to be tough. All right, see here before the recession, and here before the recession, the S&P hit 1,500 and couldn't quite break through, and we ultimately ended up in a recession. It wasn't caused by the stock market. Well, actually, this one was caused by the stock market. And you see now in the recovery we have here, we've blown through that 1,500 number and far exceeded it. In fact, we've almost doubled it. And you see that little bit of a correction that we're in right now. Now, only time's going to tell if this correction is the beginning of a much larger correction or if it's just a little breather before we continue to exceed. But again, even with this massive run-up we've had, tremendous amount of wealth on paper that's been created, no one's talking about pulling money out of the market being overbought right now. No one's worried about that. It's because it's different this time. And let's tell you that it's different this time because the recovery since the last recession has been very slow and steady. Let's tell you it's different this time because interest rates remain historically low. It's different this time because inflation isn't a concern. It's different this time because the PE multiple of the stock market is still within historic norms. And these are all absolutely true. And factual statements like this exist before every recession. It gives us something to grab onto, to say, no, but it's different this time. And those are the 4 most dangerous words. It's different this time. Because it's always different this time. We learned from the last time. We learned from the last mistake. The next recession isn't going to be just like the last one or the one before that. It's going to happen differently. It's going to happen for a different reason. But it is going to happen, and it's somewhat predictably. Every 7 to 10 years, we're going to have a recession. And the ultimate result of that recession is the same. It's going to be a stock market correction, a sluggish economy, and a reduction in credit by lenders. And so despite being due for a recession, nobody's talking about it. Partially because there's a lot of confidence out there. So the University of Michigan calls up a bunch of households, asks them a bunch of questions, and that's how we get consumer confidence, consumer sentiment, and a few other indexes. So this is consumer confidence, again, over that same 30 years, those same 3 recessions. Consumer confidence, in this particular one right here, they called and they asked 2 questions. Financially, are you better off or worse off than you were a year ago? And is now a good time or a bad time to make a major household purchase? Furniture, appliances, that sort of thing. And you see we're at a pretty high level of consumer confidence right now. In fact, we're higher than we were here in 05 and 06, just below where we were in the late 90s prior to the dot-com bust, and higher than we were in the late 80s. And why is that? Well, it's in part because we've got a lot of jobs out there. A lot of people are working, and they're very confident with their jobs. So this is the unemployment rate over that same 30 years. Same blue lines show recessions. That blue dotted line here, that's 4% unemployment. 4% unemployment is called full employment. It's essentially the theory that anyone that wants a job has a job. When you're at 4%, you're at full employment. And you see that in the last 30 years, we've been at or near full employment 3 times. The first 2, we had a recession within 12 months. The most recent time is right now. We've had 4.1% unemployment for the last 2 months, and the next report will come out on Friday, I believe. Americans are crazy, and maybe everyone's crazy, but Americans are especially crazy. We don't save much in the first place. So this is the personal savings rate. Again, it's the same 30-year chart we're looking at. So as the stock market increases, as consumer confidence increases, unemployment drops, what do? We certainly don't save. So you see the savings rate. We save at the end of the recession because we're like, I'm not going to do that again. And then we immediately start spending, and we spend until we're like, oh shit, we're in a recession. right here, this dotted blue line is where our personal savings rate is right now. Historically, we've only been here or lower twice. One was right before the Great Recession, and one was 2 months in 2005. So where are we? We're at full employment, extremely high consumer confidence. If you have money in the stock market, you're worth more now on paper than you probably ever have been. So you've got a good job, you're confident in the economy, your retirement fund's looking great. So what are you going to do? Well, University of Michigan told us what we're going to do. We're going to go buy a bunch of stuff. And we have been, and we're going to keep buying stuff. And because we have no money saved, we're going to buy it on credit because that's the American way. So this is all of the debt in America over the last 15 years. Not surprisingly, the vast majority of our debt is tied up in our homes. Mortgage and home equity lines, 71% of our debt. I'm not worried about that. That's not going to be the next crisis. It's that 29% up there that we're going to focus on. So that 29% of debt breaks into 4 categories. We're going to start at the bottom, this pickle green down here. Auto loans. 9% of our debt is auto loans. And that number is slowly increasing over the last 6 or 7 years. Orange line, credit card debt. 6% of Americans' debt is our credit cards. That number is relatively flat over the past 6 or 7 years, starting to increase a little bit. The gray is other, we're going to ignore that. The red is student loan debt. Student loans make up 10% of Americans' debt right now. Over the last 15 years, that has more than tripled as a percentage. As a gross number, that number is 10 times higher than it was 15 years ago. Let's see how that debt's performing. Again, pickle green down here with the auto loans. Sorry, that was a joke from the bar last night. Auto loans, relatively low default rate, both historically and right now. It is slowly rising, but Americans rely so much on their cars, that's going to be one of the very last things they stop paying for. So it's not going to be on auto loans. Credit cards. Credit card default rates are actually lower now than they have been in the last 15 years, which is a great start. You see it's starting to tick up just a little bit, though. And if you also look back in 06, 07, 08, in the last recession, credit card debt is a lagging indicator, not a leading indicator. I'm sorry, credit card default rates. So it wasn't until the middle of the last recession when credit card default rates started to spike. And it wasn't until after the recession was over when credit card defaults peaked. So this number starting to go up may be worrisome and could be a much larger problem. But really, let's look at student loan debt. So we talked about how much student loans have increased. Over the last 15 years, default rates of student loans have almost doubled. We're now at 11%. Student loans are defaulting at a higher rate than credit card debt. So here's what I think. Mr. Optimist. Actually, I am an optimist. This is just depressing. I'm sorry. I believe that the next economic weakness is going to come on the consumer debt side. And it's going to come in 2 places. Student debt. More than a quarter of Americans have debt related to themselves or their families. Average amount of $27,000. Half of them are worried they can't pay it back. More than a third have been late at least once. A quarter have been late multiple times. This is primarily on an 18 to 34-year-old demographic, but what it means is that during that time, there's less wealth accumulation, less ability to purchase homes, less ability to buy things in general, and a higher debt level and higher credit levels. So this is leading to less ability to purchase things in the future, and this level of debt is continuing to grow. And credit cards. Credit card usage is just starting to increase a little bit, but credit limits and available credit has been increasing rapidly for the last 9 years. Anyone that, you get your credit card statement and you say no, your credit limits almost each month, it's increasing. So as Americans begin to need to use their credit cards more, the availability is going to be there. And it's there greater than it was in 2007 and 2008 because we've had such a long extended period of time of expansion. So in addition to those one-time purchases that everyone's making, the furniture, the appliances, recurring debt is going to become a larger and larger item that we put on our credit cards. Vendors have gotten really, really good at saying, hey, let auto pay this. Think about what's on your credit card each month that you probably don't even remember you're paying. $9.99 for Netflix. $34.95 for Ancestry.com, which I haven't used in probably 3 years. I still know it's there. I just haven't canceled it, but I still pay $35 a month for something. Your cell phone, your utilities, and for some people, your credit card payment. I'm sorry, your timeshare payment. So as that level of debt grows and those recurring debt grows, Americans aren't quite aware of how much they're putting on their credit cards. They're not writing that $200 check to their cable company going, is it worth it? They're not writing that $300 check to the timeshare company going, is it really worth it? Instead, they get a big bill at the end of the month on their credit card and go, holy shit. And maybe they pay it off. Maybe they make the minimum payment. Maybe it's something in between. But they don't really know how much debt they have and where it's coming from and how it's accumulating. Now, why do we care? Because we work in a unique industry. We rely on the American consumer's ability to actually purchase our product, which isn't unique. However, 75% of our consumers rely on the developers to provide that financing. And the vast majority of that financing is based on FICO scores. And as student loan debt and credit card debt increases and defaults increase, FICO scores go down, and the overall ability to purchase goes down. And autopay is great, and developers have been great about pushing autopay. And as a lender, I love autopay for the reason I've said. Consumers aren't thinking, is it worth $300 a month? And autopay is great. And a lot of that autopay trickles down to credit cards. But autopay is only great until that credit card's maxed out or until that consumer can't make that minimum monthly payment anymore, at which point those payments are going to stop, and they're not going to start again. A recession driven by consumer debt will be completely different than any recession we've ever had to date, and it has the potential to impact certain segments of our business very significantly. And this might be the scariest part. It's not just a US problem. This article ran in the Wall Street Journal 10 days ago. I'd already put my slides together, I'd already done all the research. And it came out, and first I was like, damn it, somebody else figured this out. And then I read the article, and I was like, oh shit, I'm onto something, maybe. And this is a busy graph, so don't even worry about it. But basically, it breaks into 4 quadrants. And this is the risky quadrant here, the upper right. And this is a chart, and it's how quickly debt is growing in these countries and a percentage of GDP. So GDP here, percentage of growth, and debt here. This is the high risk quadrant. This is the US right now. We're not even high risk. This is where the US was in 2007, just before the Great Recession. These countries here are at or more levered than the US was in 2007. Switzerland, Australia, Norway, South Korea, Canada, New Zealand, and Sweden. So this has the potential to not only be a US problem, but a global crisis. So remember that just because someone says it's different this time, doesn't mean it's not going to happen. A recession's not going to happen. It's going to happen, it's just going to happen differently. Thank you.